Hello, it's Larry Clark with Excelsior Music Publishing. We're doing another Meet the Composer series today. And today we have composer Jack Cooper and we have music educator Jill Geist. And thank you both for joining me today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Jill, go ahead and ask the questions you want to know of Jack and your students want to know, and then we'll see where we go.
All right, sounds great. Good morning, everyone from Southern California, and it's sunny out. As I told Larry earlier, we've been playing your music for 27 years of my teaching, so my students love you, and the audience, your music comes alive. So thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you.
And I'd also like to thank Excelsior Music for putting these seminars on, because as educators, we are grasping for things to do with resources for our students. So
Absolutely.
the time of year I kind of do a unit on what other things to do in the music business besides being a musician and so and a performer. So this is great. So it is my honor to introduce Jack Cooper today, and my students have come up with some good questions. And Jack is a good friend of mine. He's also from Southern California, and he has a great background in music. Please take a look at his bio, because I just think he's a really rounded person, which I try to teach my students. It's important not only to be a great performing musician, but that will lead you to other things and other opportunities, composing and conducting and directing and all kinds of being a teacher also. So there, and the military, which hopefully Jack will talk about also. So there's so many different options in the music world. So thank you for putting these sessions on, and I hope the students across the country enjoy it and learn from it and be inspired to create and compose also. So Jack, gosh, like I said earlier, you're so rounded, and you're a fine musician, a conductor, a composer. You write for various ensembles. It's just not one thing. So choir and jazz and classical and everything. So it's great to be a rounded musician also. He's a woodwind doubler like me, so I appreciate that. And I know he's going to talk more about what he does and how he got there through these questions. So welcome, Jack Cooper, from his office at University of Memphis, and where he's the director of jazz studies there. So good morning.
Hey, Jill, thank you so much. It's really an honor to be with you.
Thank you. My honor. So let's start with some of my junior high questions from my students. Karen Fung wants to know, it's a big question, what's your musical background?
Well, that is a big question. Well, I guess it really starts with me playing the clarinet. And that started when I was 11 years old, but backing up from that, I had tried to play, oh gosh, the violin. I tried to play the guitar, tried to play some piano, and that was tough because my mom was giving me piano lessons, and she was very, very picky, because she's probably my main inspiration, because she was a professional pianist and organist. And she taught, like you, at the middle school level for 30 years at Braille Linda, in the Braille Linda district.
Mm-hmm.
And she was very, very good. Really one of the best sight reading pianists I've ever been around. So she was pretty picky about stuff. So there was a time when I was just going into middle school, and my mom and dad sat me down at the kitchen table and said, here's the clarinet. You have been enrolled in band. That great inspiration. I've been out on the road doing master classes and stuff, and kids ask this question, and they say, oh, I was so inspired. People say, I was so inspired by the shiny trumpet or the this or the that. Well, it's like, okay, you're enrolled in band. You're starting now. But with that said, I was into music. I had been listening a lot, and I did start to do something with it. And I was very inspired. And you probably read first by Artie Shaw. And I'm still to this day, I am a huge Artie Shaw fan because the sound he gets on the clarinet. So really, on the most fundamental level, I was very inspired by that. So I went through playing in band. I was a drum major. And then I was very, very fortunate, because at that time, community college was free, in California. And as you know, at that time when I went into Fullerton College, we had a legendary group that won the Downbeat poll.
Yep.
That won the Downbeat College poll. And I got exposed to a lot of great guest artists, a lot of great players to this day who I'm close friends with, like Kai Palmer and Charlie Peters and that whole set of guys who immediately were going out on the road with Buddy Rich and stuff like that. So that was very inspiring to me. And I started to get the writing bug there. I studied with Tom Rainier, and Tom inspired me, and I realized I had a knack at writing tunes and doing some arranging. And I had done a lot of listening. My mom and dad had a huge record collection, all the way from Leonard Bernstein to Fritz Reiner records, to Charlie Parker 78s, to Stan Getz, and everything bassy you could imagine. And you know, that was very, and Ellington and Stan Kenton. So that was all very inspiring to me. And then I decided I wanted to really write, and then I transferred to Cal State Los Angeles because I wanted to go study with Bob Curnow there and Dave Caffey, and I did. And luckily there were also two very good classical composers there. So I ended up getting though I was writing, I got my bachelor's in music education and on the clarinet, because that was advice from my mom, of course. Right. And it was from Vito Suska. It was like, get the practical degree. You can do all those things you want professionally, but get that. And it was the best thing I ever did, Jill. It was really, really important. Absolutely. Then I had to decide whether I did some student teaching with Doug Norquist, who's an old friend who he actually went to Sonora High School. So we knew each other from Sonora High School. And I decided, well, I kind of want to write and I kind of want to play. And so I went ahead and did my master's in composition, and it was very good there. And then lo and behold, I auditioned for the U.S. Army Jazz Nights, and I got the gig and became a staff writer, and and it was kind of my dream. Yeah. Because and to kind of add to that a little bit, for the kids, especially, one of the first concerts that I was taken to by my dad was to go hear the Woody Herman Band. And to this day, I still think of that concert and sitting in that seat in Plummer Auditorium thinking, I want to do that. That's it. That's what I really want to do. And I got to do it. I did that for 6 years. I toured with a pro big band. I was, in the Army doing that. And of course, I've worked with a lot of different people on a lot of different shows and bands and so on. But I got to fulfill a dream, and those were hard gigs to get, the Ambassadors and the Blues and Jazz Nights, Falconairs. And then I decided after a while, I got to study with Manny Album in New York. And Manny said, shoot, you've already got a master's degree. Why don't you go ahead and get the doctorate, and then you can kind of call your shots of the things you want to write. His line was, do you want to write Pepsi commercials for the rest of your life? And he really unleashed a thing in terms of me writing chamber music. And that's why I write the sonatas. And I just got my piano sonata recorded, was proofing that, just did the violin sonata. And I owe a lot to Manny. And I went back and did the doctorate in composition, and then I went ahead and I taught at Baylor for about a semester, Baylor University, and then I got the job here, and I've been here, and then also now past 5 years I've been going between here and that place. Right. Yeah, between that and Berlin. So I think that gives some background. So yeah.
That's great. I love it. And you're right. The performing with a military band at that caliber is a dream. So
it's well, you can't replace that, because I mean, we would get on a gig, we'd be out on tour, and we would get on a gig, Jill, and it might be at a jazz festival, and someone might walk up, a guest artist or whoever, and say, hey man, I've got a chart. Can we do that? Can I do this with you in front of the kids? And we just read it right on the concert. Yep. And that band was reading all the time. And to be at that level, to be able to do that all the time, every time. You know, people don't understand that all the time, the caliber of those bands. And it really, you know, I have a lot of stories about that band and that band performing in some pretty tough circumstances, and of course sounding consistent every single time and really nailing it every time. And of course doing my writing. And that's where I really learned how to write. I really learned how to write because I could bring anything, any day, and they'd sight read it down, and I'd know exactly what I wanted to change, or what worked right or what didn't, or they'd tell me what didn't work right.
Critics.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, good. Well, we do have a lot of questions, and I'm sure
I know, we got to get through them all.
Come back. Christopher Cruz, one of my clarinetists / piano players, very interested in composing, very interested. Good. He asks, where do you draw inspiration from in order to compose music?
Oh, that's a great question. I get asked that a lot. Well, yeah, I saw that. And gosh, it depends on the piece. You know, like one of the things I just wrote for Excelsior Music, I was very inspired to write a tune after Oksana, my wife, and I came back from Gran Canaria. We were in Gran Canaria over Christmas, and we saw a Christmas parade. We saw some absolutely beautiful parts of the island. We hiked all through the island, and it was just gorgeous. So there was this one place that I took video. It's the very northern part of the island called Punta Sardina. And the waves come crashing off the Atlantic over there. And so I was very inspired by that Christmas parade to write something that was a batucada kind of beat, which is kind of samba and some other things involved. So that was that inspiration. Now, I just mentioned the piano sonata. Well, that of course was written for my wife to be recorded for the label over in New Zealand, and there were several different inspirations because Oksana likes Prokofiev a lot, and I love Prokofiev. So the first movement is kind of Prokofiev. The next movement is a little melancholy, but very nostalgic because it was written right after my dad passed. And then the third movement is kind of my Afro-Latin stuff, a lot of different Afro-Latin things that I like doing. And, you know, coming from my background, coming from Los Angeles and liking Afro-Latin music a lot. So, you know, it depends on the piece, and it depends on, you know, where it's coming from. And it's a very good question, but that's some. I mean, I go piece by piece by piece and talk about that, but, you know, but those are two from two different sources.
Excellent. And then from Abigail Scafidi, do you originally write a song for a specific instrument, or do you just have all the parts you want other instruments to play already in your head?
That's another really good. Like I said, all these questions are fantastic. That's kind of two parts. I kind of answered a little bit of that, but one of the things I'm most proud of is my clarinet sonata. But we're clarinet players, and you know I actually have a degree on the clarinet, know all that repertoire, but it's designed for the clarinet. It cannot be any other instrument playing that piece, of course, because it goes all the way down to the shallow, down to a low F, and it goes all the way up into the altissimo through the clarion. So you can't, you know what I mean? That's yes. That is designed for that instrument. The melody lines are designed, all the arpeggios, all the sounds are really designed for the clarinet, on the clarinet sonata. The violin sonata is like that too. That is designed for the violin. So I listen to different pieces that are like that, that are the good pieces that are designed for that instrument. Of course, you can't not listen to the Brahms, the two sonatas. Like for clarinet, I'd have to go back and I listen to that because those are probably the greatest clarinet pieces, most beautiful clarinet pieces written for the instrument, the F and the F minor and the E flat major. So, and then I listen to for the violin sonata for that stuff. And then when I feature someone, if I feature someone with a big band, I listen to that instrument, and then I listen to big band. Now, the second part of her question is really interesting, because hearing everything at once, yes, I do. Yes, I do. If I have to write for a chamber orchestra, I go and listen to that, and then I have that in my head. I can hear all the parts. If I'm writing something like the two things that I wrote for Excelsia just recently, and I had to write them quickly, because they were signed, and you got to get them done. I have that in my head. I have that sound in my head. But what I would suggest to anybody who wants to learn how to compose and arrange, listen. Do a lot of listening. Do a lot of listening to different things, and do some transcribing. And so you have that in your head, because when I transcribe, I'm putting it back down on the paper. I've got it in my head the way it looks on the paper, and I'm putting it back down on the paper that way. So that's really important when you start talking about this stuff and hearing it in your head, hearing those things. You have to listen to those things. You can't all of a sudden just wish, hey, I'd like to write for a kazoo. Well, you better be listening to a lot of kazoos.
Right.
So I hope that answers her question.
Yeah, most definitely. From 7th grader Ashley Gledhill, I want to ask, what is your favorite type of song to create, and why? Is it slow and sad, fast and mad, happy? What type of song is your favorite to create?
Oh gosh, I like to create anything. I like a challenge, but I guess I do like writing stuff that's right in the pocket, swinging, dang, dang, ga-dang, dang, ga-dang, right? Yeah. I had a lot of fun just writing something for Bernie Dressel's big band. That hopefully when he gets back in the studio, we'll be recording some of my music. But that came out really nice, a drum feature for him, but it's right at that tempo, and it's swinging, and, to hear that back, and to hear everything, really swinging hard at that tempo, that medium swing tempo. And I had my college band play it, and they said, "Oh, how did you come up with that? That's so swinging and blah, blah, blah." Well, that's the reaction you want, and they feel what I feel. So, and you never know sometimes when you write those things, how people are going to react. And that chart got a really nice reaction recently. So I guess I come back to those things, though I write such a wide variety of music for everything. It's, it depends. And also I just wrote a thing that I like a lot that's going to be on a new recording for Origin Records on their classical label, and it was a thing for piano and marimba.
Oh, wow.
And it was both of the outside movements are up tempo, and I really like when I have those kinds of instruments to be able to play at a more swift tempo, to be able to handle that. And piano and marimba can do that, can play a lot of notes together and be able to do things. So, but I don't know. Those are two things, that I like.
Yeah, how fun. And then the next one is from my son, Carson Runke, and he's a trombone and a tuba player. So this is kind of a fun question. How do you determine how difficult the parts are going to be for the low-end guys? Most of the time, they never have the melody or the cool part. So as an educator of junior high kids, I kind of know the answer to that. But as he's a tuba player and trombone player, he wants the fun parts too.
I get it. That's a really, really good question, because and that's a difficult thing for us composers, and especially ones that write for education, for educational kinds of groups. And I've been doing it a long time. Larry's been doing it a little longer than me, but I've been doing it for, gosh, almost 30 years. And this is a difficult thing, because in that, let me address a couple of things here. I'm going to try and not make this too long. The first thing is, of course, at the middle school level, when you're writing level 2 and level 3 things is that the low guys have to play the fundamental in the 5th many times, and they don't get to play the 3rd a lot. It's very limited in terms of what's going on, unless you go out of your way and you write the melody first for the low end guy. And that's generally what we have to try and do, is write some kind of interesting bass line or a melody line and then design things around it. And a lot of composers won't do that. I personally think, Jill, to answer that and answer your son's question, is that I think the human voice is not at that level, and we sing melodies that we want to hear as composers. And generally, unless I'm a low tenor, and so maybe in the middle to the, up to alto, I'm going to sing melodies and hear melodies up there. And it took me a while, and listening to like an Arnold Jacobs playing tuba, or many trombone players, Bill Reichenbach playing bass trombone, or Jaco Pastorius playing bass, that low instruments playing the melody and hearing those and getting used to that. I think a lot of composers don't hear melodies down there, and so they don't start with the melody down there and then design things around it. And that's kind of my theory about it. But unfortunately, yes, the low guys have to play the root in the 5th, or because if we don't have that fundamental for the overall group, then we have no basis for tuning. So it's the big pyramid, and they're the low part of the pyramid, and unfortunately, they have to hold that note or give those 2 reference pitches, that root in that 5th, and don't get the 3rd a lot, and don't get the 7th. Oh my God, playing the 7th, then you're you're right by the root, and the other kids are like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So I think that you were probably thinking that, but that's what we try and do. We try and feature them as many times as we can and write melodies. It's a little bit challenging at that level. And once it gets further and further up into other levels, especially at the pro level, then you have a lot more flexibility to be able to do things,
Yep. Very good. Exactly. Good. And then James Glennie, a great question, and he knows the answer, but maybe you can inspire students more. How often should you practice?
Well, gosh, yes, it is. I know he says, well, every day. Yes, you should practice every day. If you ask about how often you should practice and how often we get to practice as music professionals, you and me, and especially us as composers, you got to get a lot of practice in while you're young. You got to get muscle memory in. You got to get those things in, and you should be practicing every day. You have the time to do it now, while you're in middle school and in high school. If you really love doing this, if you really love playing, which I always say to my students, you have to fall in love with doing it, and that brings the practice. It's kind of the chicken or the egg thing. It's like, oh, well, you're telling me I should practice. And it's like, well, you need to fall in love with the instrument and playing music. And it's a natural occurrence that's going to happen. And it'll motivate you to practice of playing that piece or playing that little solo or that feature or things like that. And you do need to build up that muscle memory, and you do need to practice every day. And sometimes some of that practice can be very tedious, and you have to learn how to make that fun and interesting and be interested in that. Because when we get older and we have many more things going on in our lives, and we actually have to make a living, or for me as a composer especially, and I have to spend a lot of time composing and arranging, and I just don't get that much time. I'm looking at the next gig, and then I'm practicing for the next gig. Even someone who's almost exclusively a player like Gary Foster, who's a good friend of mine and I studied with, I asked him this question when I was at Cal State LA, and he said, I practice for the next gig primarily. He said, it's just gig after gig after gig. That muscle memory has been built up from before of practicing every day and doing those things. So, yes, I know it. Yes, you got to practice every day, and you have to find the inspiration, the fun, and the things that you want to practice. And you've got to get through those tedious things of practicing, so.
Yep. And then it pays off in the end. It really does.
It does.
It really
Yes,
does.
it does.
And then for Veronica Cobian, she has 2 questions. Wow, this is good. What is the biggest challenge that you are faced with while composing music? What's challenging?
Oh, it's always the due date.
The due date. There you go. Pressure.
Well, it's that's a double-edged sword in terms of composing music, because I'm very careful. The first thing out of my mouth, because generally, and you said it, and you were very, very kind and flattering earlier about this, is that I really have done just about everything you can do in terms of writing for ballet and writing for film and TV, and doing a lot of different things, and chamber music and full orchestral music. So it's sometimes I find a challenge when about the type of music, and I'll address that in a second though, but mainly it is the first thing I nail down when someone calls me or commissions me or so on. I find that due date. I said, when do you need it by? What do you need and when do you need it by? And then and very few times, but sometimes I have to say, well, you're gonna have to push the date up, or push it back, I should say, or you're going to have to find someone else, or, something like that. I just had to do that recently, and unfortunately, and I'm going to say this, is that sometimes if the date's too close, I will charge a little bit more, and that's the way it is. I mean, as a professional composer and arranger, this was an arrangement assignment, and in fact, I tried to find someone else for them. And the 2 other people said the same thing. Well, it's going to cost this much for that time, and I have to drop everything else, and I have to do these things. So, that's part of it. The other answer I have to that, and it was kind of interesting because with the Berlin Jazz Orchestra, we're in the middle of doing the final mixes of that. There are some times when I am in the middle of an arranging project, and the stuff that's assigned or we try and decide on will not work, because that becomes a difficulty. Like all the tunes, we had about 100 different tunes that we were choosing from for there's a lot of tunes written that involve the city of Berlin.
Wow.
And so we were going through a long list of those tunes. And Jill, some of them just didn't work well. They weren't going to work well for a big band, and they weren't going to work well and come across for Mark Sakara's, for him to be able to sing them. There was one he wanted, for instance, called Auf uns, and it's a huge tune. It's a huge tune in Europe, and I tried every which way to Sunday to try, and I transcribed the tune. I tried to come up with orchestration in different ways, and it just wasn't going to work. And I said, Mark, it won't work. This is why. And he understood. He had no problems with that. But sometimes that's the composing part of it. That's the challenge in terms of, especially if I'm arranging something, and a tune just really is a square peg into a round hole to fit into that thing that the person wants. So that's, time factor, and then that style, something, genre, just they just don't fit together with what is needed. And you have to let people know that. You have to say, well, it doesn't work because A, B, C, D. Let's find an alternative to what you've tried to pick here. So wow. Yeah, that makes sense. And then a perfect ending question from my students: how do you get your music published? Oh gosh, that's a difficult thing, because that's changed over the years, and Larry can probably say this too. Gosh, I can tell my story, and I can tell stories of a couple of different students that I have that are very good at what they do in sort of in the publishing world. I guess start with me. I mean, I was writing a lot at Cal State Los Angeles, and I was producing a lot of music. And I was very fortunate to be there, and I took my charts down to the Union, the local 47 down in Hollywood, to have people read them and get some tapes, you know, bring my Walkman. That's an old, like, yeah, that's how old.
No.
Yeah, way back. And get at least a cassette tape of the chart and be able to talk to people. And I went to a number of different conventions, like the ones that Excelsius shows up at, or Alfred Music. You know, used to be CPP Bellwin and all those people. You know, and you try and send demos to people and have scores and do things that will promote yourself in terms of sending it off. And you can't be bashful about it. You've got to do it and see what happens. My biggest advice is make sure, even if you're using Finale or electronic stuff, make sure your scores are clean and ready to go, and your parts are clean and ready to go, because they're going to look at that too. They're going to say, well, if this person's this disorganized on the score and the parts, gosh, are we going to have that kind of problem with them? That's a big thing. And I learned that very, very quickly. You know, my hand copy, and my students look at my hand copy. My hand copy looks like it's ready to go. It's publishable, ready to go. So it really does have to be meticulous. That's part of getting published, but you have to keep trying. And and the other thing to me is that you do have to get your musicianship as a player up, because I finally got on as a professional writer. For me, this is my background, is that I was out on the road with the Jazz Knights, and I was me and the other tenor player with the two staff writers, and half the set was mine, because we were playing for high schools and kids, and like I was doing covers of, Madonna tunes and, Amy Grant tunes. So I had all those tunes for our singer. So after one of the concerts, Carl Strauman, who is one of the writers and the old friend of Larry's and is an old friend of mine. Carl, we were at Carl's high school, and he came up, hey, how would you like to be published? I'm like, wow. And he didn't even say his name or anything, and he gave me his card. I'm like, oh my God.
Wow.
So, but the point is that my musicianship, both as a player, reputation as a player, was at a level, and he heard all the charts at a level that constituted that thing. You know what I mean? So that helped, that gig ushered me into getting published. I tried for a number of years and tried to do my own publishing. But finally that helped me a lot in terms of doing that. Now, I will say this, the other part of my answer, one of my students, one of my former doctoral students who I worked for, he has his own publishing company, and he's in New Zealand. He's the director of jazz studies at University of Wellington in New Zealand, and that publishing company is doing well. And it does publishing, and they record CDs. And I'm on several of the CDs, and I write for him. He did it. He went his own way, and he's done it right in terms of producing his own stuff. That doesn't always work out. But he did it right and went full whole hog, as they say, into it. And Dave does really well. And then there have been others that have done well. Another one of my students I forwarded to my friends over at Hal Leonard, and they did pretty well. That was about 15 years ago, doing transcriptions and arrangements for guitar and so on. And he had a bunch of things published. And it's timing too. That's the other thing, because at that time, for that person to get on with Hal Leonard at that time, they needed someone. They were desperate for someone to do guitar arrangements, of guitar group arrangements and guitar transcriptions, and be able to have the patience to do all the tab and do all that stuff, because you got to put all that stuff in educational publishing. So he had the patience and the time to do that, and he does it really well. And so he got on. So you try and find someone that might be able to be a conduit, and I was able to introduce him to the people at Hal Leonard that I knew. I never worked for them, but they know me real well. And in fact, Blair, who asked me, who's my boss at Excelsior, knows me from that, our relationship, and we've known each other for a long time, and Larry too. So there are several of us in that publishing kind of world who know one another, and I was able to do that. So that, that's kind of, I don't know if I've got one set answer. It's several answers all at once. And I try and tell my students this, is that you try and get to know people, you try and have good relationships, you work on your keep getting musicianship and keep getting inspired and do that stuff. And it's that combination of things. I got the call to do some work for Excelsior, and I'm very proud of the fact that out of the blue, Blair calls me and he says, "Hey, how would you like to work for us?" And I'm more than happy to. Larry's was a great boss at Warner Brothers, and Larry's done a fantastic thing by starting this company focused on what we do best and helping us to make good decisions, and we help to supply good music, and we're very inspired to do that. So those are relationships that I've developed over many years, and you try and do that with great musicians. The relationship you and I have is a very good one, and the common friends that you and I have, and you try and develop those, and those are all very, very important. That's why I can tell your students this: show up on time to Miss Geist's class, be ready to go. Because you never know. She knows a lot of people. and one of these days, she might have just that little bit of reference to someone else, because you were reliable, you really were inspired, and she might say, "Hey, I know this person and they can help you out, and let me try and introduce you," because that's kind of the way all professions work. It's a reliability and an inspiration issue, and we want to be around one another. You want to be a person that people want to be with, and because it's not an easy thing in terms of this publishing thing, specifically this question, because there's deadlines, and you've got to come through, and you've got to promise people some things that you can do, and you've got to get it done. So I hope that answered that question.
Absolutely. And I was going to end with my question, but you answered it. And I always tell my students, it's part of practicing and the work ethic and being there, but a lot of it depends on your personality and your kindness and your giving and thoughtful. And that really is the most important thing. People get to know you and they like you, and that networking will come with all of that. Right? And so you did a great job at the end, Jack, of wrapping it up.
Well,
I was asked you the same thing. So,
I might add to that, don't be afraid of failure, because failure is just an opportunity to learn. And don't give up, and keep trying, and keep submitting your music, and keep networking and all that stuff. And if it's meant to happen, it will. But I also tell young composers that you write music for yourself first. And if you write music for yourself and people like it, that's a happy coincidence. But if you like it yourself, that's all that really matters.
You have to be inspired. I mean, Larry, I heard the Kenton band, the Basie band, and I can write something like that. I want to write something like Ernie Wilkins, and you do become very inspired by that, and you have to write because you love it, and you got to want to love it, and you find other people who love it. So absolutely.
Well, thank you both so much for taking the time out of your day to do this. We certainly appreciate it. And I know students everywhere and teachers everywhere are going to enjoy listening to what you had to say. So Jill, thank you very much for taking the time. We hope your students like this. And Jack, we look forward to many more charts. Absolutely. So bring them on.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody. This is, again, Excelsior Music Publishing. Meet the composer, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.